You can holler, you can applaud, you can scream, you can do anything you want. I can't hear you anyway.
This is Salt Lake Dirt. I'm your host, Kyler Bingham. Today on the show, I welcome back author Bruce Wagner. If you've listened to our last episode with Bruce, you know that he is one of my favorites of all time. He was kind enough to return to the show, talk about his latest novel, Roar, American Master, the oral biography of Roger Orr. Roar recently came out on Arcade Publishing, and it's really the kind of book that you don't want to end. I know I didn't. It's simply that good. I highly recommend it. I'm going to read a little bit of the synopsis of Roar. It says, a new novel by Hollywood's master of satire, the myth of an epic public life, its triumphs and tragedies, is a particularly American obsession. Roar is a metafictional exploration of such a life and attendant fame of an extraordinary and completely made-up man. Born in Nashville in 1940 and adopted by a wealthy San Francisco couple, Roger Orr, Roar, became an underground stand-up comedian with a cult following while still in his teens, segueing to an acclaimed songwriter in the Sixties. In the decades that followed, his talent spanned the worlds of entertainment, from film directing and books to fine art. This book is just epic in proportions. It mixes reality with fiction. You know, Wagner does that in such an amazing way. And then this new approach of doing it like an oral biography, just made it so accessible. I love it. So, let's just jump right into it. Here is our new interview with Bruce Wagner on Salt Lake Dirt. Thanks for listening. Bruce, thank you so much for returning to the Salt Lake Dirt podcast. You're one of my favorites by far, and you've been so generous with your time and so kind to me in the show. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is wonderful. I am so excited to talk about Roar. I did get an actual copy. So last time we spoke, I had the ARC. Yeah. Which was marked up. So I'm kind of picking through it now. First off, what a beautiful book. Just like visually, the cover, the pages, the inside cover, could have fooled me. It looks like a real biography right here.
That was sort of the idea. And, the publisher, Tony Lyons and Arcade went all out, embossed lettering, matte cover, end pages of a Winslow Homer painting that plays an important part in the book. And it was always my thought, was to have it as end pages, my fantasy, I should say, because, it's something that when an author suggests that to a publisher, you don't hear back from them about it. So it's a lovely book, and it's supposed to mirror kind of an oral history of Saul Bellow or Norman Mailer or Orson Welles. It looks like a very serious oral history, which it turns out to be. Only it's a novel told in the form of an oral history.
Yeah, so I guess we could tell our listeners what the book, just kind of what it's about. It's a novel, but it's an oral biography about a man named Roger Orr, also known as Roar. And he, I would love to just kind of hear, you tell our listeners about the book, the man, and why he deserved such a wonderful oral biography with all these different people. In a way, you mentioned Orson Welles. I was thinking of Orson Welles, just in the sense that they're like these fully formed people as young men. They come in as powerhouse geniuses, Yeah. So anyway, I'd love to hear about it.
Roger Orr is someone who becomes a towering cultural figure, not just in the United States, but in world culture. And he comes from a very wealthy background. And from early on, his first success is a bit accidental, inadvertent, as a young stand-up comedian at the age of 14. He later becomes a songwriter, wrote some of the American standards, a film director of great repute, an actor, and a sculptor, and a novelist, and a dermatologist. So I was playing a little bit with the kind of the figures that have earned or warranted oral histories are usually men or women of genius, and I was exploring in a way that was almost satirical the accomplishments of these people, and so that's what I did with Roger Orr. But as I was writing it, what began as a kind of grandiose version of Shouts and Murmurs, let's say in the New Yorker, or a Donald Barthelemy kind of short story that was a riff on the form of the oral history, became a full-dressed, full-throated novel for me. And I became captivated, as I hope the reader will be, with his history. As it turns out, he was adopted. He was the child of a black woman and a white man who were revealed late in life. The revelation comes to him late in life. His mother became a very famous jazz singer, whose voice was likened to Billie Holiday or Bessie Smith. And his father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan who raped Rohr's mother. This is 1940. So the book covers just about 80 years. Rohr lived to be 78 years old and died just before the pandemic. And the book, in increments of 15 years at a time, 5 books, I think, covers the waterfront in terms of American culture and world culture, and also mirrors many of the tropes of oral histories, which are rife with scandal, hospitalizations for surgical interventions or psychiatric interventions, and also at one point Roger Orr is shot by a fan, and all the awards that he won, the National Book Award, Academy Awards for his work, Grammys for his work, etc. So by the time you come to the end of this book, hopefully you will have gone on a kaleidoscopic journey alongside Roger Orr, a journey that in many ways reflects a lot of the controversies of our time. Roger Orr also felt that he was born in the wrong body, and late in life, in his late 60s, has a trans-feminine gender identity surgery, and then decides to reverse that. So he's kind of a harbinger, a precursor of many of the issues that have rocked our culture and continue to.
Right. Oh, can you hear me okay? I think we cut. Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I think one thing that if people read the book, which I encourage people to do, they will see that just how complex of a person Rohr was. This was not when he reverses the surgery, it was not like he regretted doing the initial surgery. That's very clear that comes across. And I think just, I believe I heard you in one of your recent interviews say, the nuance,
Yes.
that a lot of the culture right now is missing.
Right.
This,
we
this has it.
capable of nuance. And Roger Orr, if there are those who object to this notion of him wanting to reverse the surgery, those will be of necessity people who have not read the book. What happens with Roger Orr is he's always had a spiritual life. In fact, in the book, we bring him to India, where he has many realizations, gets very ill, and he is a student of Buddhism, and the so-called third sex, the one that is outside the two genders. So he does not feel he made a mistake. He feels that he's somehow ashamed or embarrassed that he wanted to identify with either gender. I think the way I've described it is a way that it is also described in the book, that many Buddhists say the body is a hotel. Many men and women of knowledge say the body is a hotel. And Roger Orr, it becomes clear to him that he's been redecorating the room with a kind of obsessive fervor, and that there is no point to redecorating a room when you are going to be checking out. So he wants to focus toward the end of his life on things that are outside the arena of gender, outside the arena of everything. And that, for me, explains why he decides to reverse that decision. He is, when he does make that announcement, the LGBTQ community reacts with venom, and that angers him. So he actually doesn't reverse the bottom surgery, but lets them think he has. He's a contrarian. He's always someone that is an outsider. And so that's his kind of fuck you, if I may use those words.
Yes.
On you. Yes.
Please do.
That's his fuck you to those that are do not share the concept of nuance.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've been enjoying doing so with my new copy of it, I've been taking it to work, and I leave it with the back up on my desk. So I have a lot of people interacting with me throughout the day. I'm a high school teacher, so a lot of teenagers, coworkers are coming by, and I just love seeing their response when they kind of skim through and see who has done a blurb on Roar, and the look on their face is amazing, because no matter how old or young they are, they definitely recognize a few of these, and they're amazed by it. And it takes them a minute, and some people they don't even, I just let them go on with it. They don't recognize what it says and how everyone is saying the exact same thing. So we have James Baldwin, Kim Kardashian, Oprah, Sharon Tate. That's what raised a few eyebrows, and it was so satisfying seeing all these age groups from 15 years up to, late 60s react to this back cover. It's wonderful.
Yeah, let me kind of talk about that a bit. But first I want to backtrack. We were talking about how the book resembles a bona fide, serious oral history. And I won't say who this person is, but they are featured in the book. And none of the people that are featured in the book, I have many non-fictional people, real people, in other words. I never consulted any of them, and said, I'm going to put you in this book. Are you all right with that? I didn't need to, because, it was all done with great affection. And that was done because I wanted, the book to have, a real cohesion to it in terms of the tapestry of voices, fictional family members, fictional friends, real friends, real critics, fictional critics. So the book becomes a kind of melting pot that hopefully what emerges from that is something that is a facsimile of reality, at least the experience that we have when we read a book like this. My publisher was asking me about blurbs for the book. It's part of what publishers do. They want a book that they publish to be heralded and trumpeted by those who the public knows. And my idea was to have fictional blurbs, which is absolutely taboo in the world of publishing. And of course, it's something the lawyers in their sleep say no to. They don't even have to be conscious. It's that much of a taboo that it's just instinctive. It's reflexive. Their nose. And I kind of legally solved the problem, at least in my mind, of having fictional blurbs by each person says the same thing. I'm paraphrasing it, but Roar reads like a messy magisterial novel, which it is, something like that.
Yeah.
And so each one says the same thing. So the argument would be that any reasonable reader shopping for this book would be puzzled that 12 people could say the exact same thing. Of course, they still said no, so I added some people that were dead. And many people don't know who James Baldwin is and don't know whether he's dead, alive, or a fictional character. Sharon Tate is someone that most people would know is real and is dead. So my publisher is also an attorney, and he got advice for and against, and he went with the let's do it approach. So it's another thing that I like. And in the photo credit for myself is also a fictional photo credit. It's Arthur Felig, who was Ouija. And of course,
yeah,
that's an impossible thing because Ouija died many, many years ago. So the book is a construct, but it's not a parody. I wanted to avoid the idea of writing a book that could be called a parody of the form. That would be a diminishment for me of the gravitas of the book and the story that I was telling.
That's wonderful. That kind of leads me into a question I did want to ask you about. So we have these fictitious characters, real people. It becomes very real as you become immersed in the biography. It's compiled, edited by you. Mm-hmm. You appear in the book at different points. Roger Orr takes an interest in your monologue, your novella, The Empty Chair, mm-hmm. and you become involved in that. So it's so immersive, and I'm just curious. Writing in that fashion where you include yourself and you have certain people where they say your name, they mention you, like Bruce, you wouldn't believe this. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, it's meta squared, I should say, because The Empty Chair was really my first long indulgence in this particular form. The Empty Chair are two novellas that are interlinked. And those novellas are essentially two very long monologues of people that I am interviewing. So in The Empty Chair, occasionally, very occasionally, one of those characters would call me by name. So that was something that was an experiment for me, perhaps more than an experiment, because it came so naturally to me. And in this book, I am a character, much more of a character than I was in The Empty Chair. I think that I was I've always been captivated by the form of oral history. It's so accessible and so reader friendly. And as a writer, it also eliminates the ligaments, the musculature, the architecture that's required when writing a more traditional novel. In other words, I don't have to talk about setting the computer up to have a Zoom call with Kyler Bingham. I don't have to say that Kyler Bingham has a beard, messy but magisterial. I don't have to describe my own mood, what you were wearing, what I am wearing, what I did the morning of this podcast, etc. And that gives one tremendous freedom when all you are left with is the chorus of demonic human voices, and those demonic voices with their vernacular are majestic and break through occasionally into the transcendent. When you read an oral history and you read, let's say, long remarks by Meryl Streep or people that you imagine you know because they've been in your consciousness for so long, there's really a universal language. There's a kind of baseline for human beings when they are in conversation, when they are being interviewed. It's quite different from a poetic expression, although the poetry of the vernacular is very real. There's no artifice to it. So if you're having a conversation with a writer, a well-known one, someone like Salman Rushdie, and someone that is illiterate in the next paragraph, there will still be great common ground between those two people. So I didn't thoroughly research how people would sound. There are many times, for example, there's a long review by Toni Morrison in the New York Times of a book that Rohr wrote called The Jungle Book. And I channeled her, what I imagined to be her voice, but I didn't do that much meticulous research into it. Stephen Fry, who did voices in the audiobook, we have done an audiobook of this, which I think will be available soon. Stephen Fry called it personation rather than impersonation. And I thought that was a lovely way of putting it. We had, I think we had over 20 actors reading more than 400 voices. And Stephen Fry did himself and many others in the book, all of whom he seemed to know. He knew the painter Francis Bacon. He knew Picasso's biographer, or the man who's mostly known as Picasso's biographer, John Richardson. He knows Eddie Izzard and did all of those voices, Gore Vidal as well, whom he knew. We had Wally Shawn do himself, and Debbie Eisenberg, his wife, the wonderful writer, in fact, read the Toni Morrison review for the New York Times of Roger's book. We had Griffin Dunn read himself, Beverly D'Angelo read herself. We had Graydon Carter read himself. So it was a very complex project, and I wanted to mention it not just because I think it's going to be of value for people that are perhaps less liable to pick up a book and read a book, but I also wanted to stress that they are two completely different animals. I think it's easier to say of certain novels that the audio book of the novel hews close to the book. These are two completely different experiences. For me, the audiobook does not have the nuance or the sophistication of the physical book. And yet the physical book certainly doesn't have the warmth, the humanity, the unexpectedness of the audiobook either. But we had Mark Maron read Roger Orr, and Mark that was interesting for me because I also had an idea of what people would sound like. Mm-hmm. And Stephen Fry sounds exactly like Tom Stoppard. He sounds exactly like Gore Vidal. But I had the marvelous and brilliant actress and comedian Kate Berlant read Caitlyn Jenner. And she was not impersonating Caitlyn Jenner. She was personating, as Stephen Fry said. And Mark Maron brought a kind of street poet contribution to that of Roger Orr. In my head, I was thinking that Roger Orr would sound like an Americanized Anthony Hopkins. So that startled me, and I was very pleased with it. But the book lends itself to audiobook because I have many. There's whole sections where Roger Orr is on the Tonight Show, being interviewed, the David Letterman show. He's being interviewed by Jim Jarmusch, the film director. He has a dialogue with Steven Spielberg. There's many aspects of the book that lend themselves to the human voice, including sections of screenplays that he's written, diaries that he's written, and of course many reviews of his work.
Well, I'm really eager to listen to it. I can't wait when it comes out. I'm getting a copy right away, and I'm a huge Maron fan here, so I'm really excited to hear that. I know you had that event at the Beverly Hills Library the week the book came out. I would love to hear about. I really wanted to make it to that. I wasn't able to. I'd love to hear how that went. Some of the different people read their parts. So I'm just really excited to hear about how the event itself how it went down.
It was moderated by Sam Wasson, the wonderful film historian. Who's written, he's very prolific. He's written books on improvisation, Breakfast at Tiffany's. He wrote the book about Bob Fosse that the award-winning television show was based on. He's just got a book out now with Janine Berlinger called it's essentially an oral history of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And it's compiled and edited by Sam Wasson and Janine Berlinger.
I got it last week. It's so far, he's going to be on the show next month. It's incredible. It's lovely. Wonderful.
So my book, of course, is compiled and edited by Bruce Wagner, and my former publisher, David Rosenthal, who published me, everything from I'm Losing You on, all of my books, except for the Marvel Universe and this one, under the imprint that he had called Blue Rider. He's just worked on, the Paul Newman memoir. And on the cover of that, it says compiled and edited by David Rosenthal. So there's an odd, something cosmic is going on that really challenges this idea of fiction versus nonfiction. One of the things I've talked about it, and I don't mind repeating it again and again, is I'm very much not influenced by, but brutally and viscerally touched by a Russian writer named Svetlana Alexievich, who has written oral histories about her country. And she won the Nobel Prize for Literature a few years ago. And she writes nonfiction. So that dreamlike aspect of the merging of the dream, the illusion of what is real and what is not real, is so compelling to me. And so with her work, is, for me, stands as towering literature. And yet, technically, it is, nonfiction. It is oral history. But at what point does anything become literature? So when I say literature, really, it's another word for art. And what is art? Art is something that that fills us with a kind of inchoate feeling, a sense of beauty and transcendence, that whatever we are involved in, our petty concerns, the things that are outside of art are so negligible. And so that's what art does. And art inspires one to live and to create. That's another, for me, something axiomatic about true art. Not everything is in that category. In fact, most of what man creates is a yearning, but it doesn't qualify as art. Art is unconscious and involves the erasure of self. And that's another thing that this book technically allowed me to do, is the author was erased. So the book is a compendium of voices, all of which the author created. And yet in the end, it was very important for me to say compiled and edited by Bruce Wagner, personated and channeled by Bruce Wagner. And what happens to Bruce Wagner? He vanishes. And that was very helpful for me, because when one is writing a book, the self and vanity and the needs of self creep in and want control. The more one loses control, or I should say abdicates control, and relies on one's craft, the muscle memory of one's craft, the better off the author is.
Yeah, there's a line near the end of the book. I'm just going to read it if you don't mind. It's probably my favorite in the book. It reminded me in many ways of the themes that you explore. It's just a beautiful little chunk. It says, Rohr felt the same way about the art he created. He knew that eventually it would bloat, stink, bleach, detach, then disappear. The facts of it never trampled or negated his joy, his vigor, and love for life. It's wonderful.
Thank you for citing that. That comes off, I think Robert Thurman is talking about death and the graveyard meditations that Buddhists have favored, where one contemplates the body, the hotel being demolished, crumbling, etc., and the stages of physical death. And I think it's quite accurate. This idea of legacy for a writer, what will be left? There will be nothing left. And all else is, it's an illusion. So that's something that I was writing that was an essential truth.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to hear about the revising process. I know you wrote this book in like a fever. It sounds like roughly 4 months from what I hear. Revising it, what was that like? We've talked about your process before, and I'm really curious about the revision process of something of this magnitude.
It's a nightmare. It's really one of the most agonizing things, but I think it's really for all novels and novelists. For me, the Arcade, this was the first book I published with them. I'm going to do another one with them. And I warned the editor. I said, my modus operandi is I turn in a book prematurely, because I turn that book in when I feel it's all there. And that doesn't mean it's even necessarily rough, although I will use that word. But when I turn a book in prematurely, in quotes, it doesn't mean that the final book will have 100 pages more or 100 pages less. or even 5 pages more or 5 pages less. It will be about the same length, and there will be nothing removed from it of any note in terms of narrative. What I do is I make, I would say, tens of thousands of small changes. And that's not an exaggeration. The first time I turned the book in with revisions, the editor sent me a note a few days later saying that her computer froze at 3,700 changes, and this can't be right. That's what she wrote in her. And then, is it, with a question mark. So that goes on and on and on. You know, there's probably 5 passes that you make after you turn in that first draft. And it goes through what they used to call manuscript changes, even though there's no physical manuscript any longer. And then it goes, the deeper you get into changes, the more costly it becomes to make changes. But it went to the very end for me, these thousands of changes that I spoke of. And to this day, you know, it's the horror of any writer. I just looked at the prologue of the editor's note and found something egregious that no one else would pick up on. So it never stops. There's always going to be errors. The book is published with errors. I've really very infrequently spoken to a writer who has not had a slew of typos in that final book, because in the end, it's really up to me. You can have fresh eyes look at it, but you can't have endless fresh eyes look at it. So your dead, numb eye becomes the freshest eye, simply because you've been so compulsive about going over what has been written. So you finally get to a point where you have to let it go. You have to let it go. I had to let it go.
Again, I'm just so excited that this book found the home that it did at Skyhorse Arcade. It is funny. I mean, we talked about the Marvel Universe last time you were on the show, but it is interesting. Like, the distribution is Simon and Schuster on both ends. So that's great. And then, so this new book, we don't really need to talk about it, but I heard you mention a little bit on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast just this week. And so that's with Skyhorse as well, correct?
Well, let's just go back for a moment, because the Marvel Universe, I had a book deal, and that was essentially, I was censured, and while the contract was not torn up by the publishing house, it was certainly impossible for me to write that book. And the cancel speak, the word is problematic. The language is problematic. Imagine saying that to a writer. The language is problematic. It would be funny if it wasn't so chilling. And that was why I released the Marvel Universe into the public domain. I didn't want to sell it, and it was very liberating for me. And as it turns out, that will be the one book that I've written that will never go out of print. But with Roger Orr, I was talking a little bit with Brett about this. There was a very strong interest on the East Coast, one of the big publishing houses, to publish this book. But when it went up the chain, that same word was used, problematic. Problematic that I am a 68-year-old white male, writing cisgender male, writing about a biracial, trans feminine entity. This was problematic. So Tony Lyons has for me is controversial, but only because he's a free speech absolutist. Arcade is a storied publishing house, now an imprint of Skyhorse, but an independent imprint. And I think that Tony is trying to restore the luster that Arcade had at one time as a literary house. So they have recently published the Blake Bailey biography of Philip Roth that was pulped. They published Woody Allen's book, and they are very literary minded. And Tony is fearless. He's, I think, perhaps the only publisher in America now who publishes on his scale, hundreds of books a year, that really takes all comers and values the literary, values the controversial, and also values the fly fisherman, which the publishing house was really built on fly fishing books that his father wanted to publish because his father was an avid fisherman. So I'm very fortunate to be able to publish, because what would the alternative be? It would be the death of my books. I would be truly writing posthumously, more so than I am now, in that my books would not be published at all, or I would have to self-publish them, or wait for someone who is not aligned with any of the major houses or minor houses to do boutique versions of my books. So now I have a forum, and I can write whatever I wish. I don't have to concern myself with the mood or the trends or the sociopathic desires of the time, because this time too shall pass. You know, the pendulum is always swinging. Sometimes it swings slowly. Sometimes it really swings quickly. So I have no crystal ball, nor do I have that desire. But it's all folly. The idea of what is not acceptable now becomes acceptable in 3 years or 20 years or in 100 years. So I'm very grateful to have a house, Arcade, and a publisher, Tony Lyons, who is fierce and is a light in the forest now, a home with a hearth in the forest.
It makes me think of I ordered a copy from Book Soup, the signed copy, and it's you signed it for you, in like a lion, out like a lion. So that made me think of so many people, yourself, Tony Lyons, just the people involved in putting stuff out like this. It is so refreshing as a reader, as a fan, to, especially with what happened, how disheartening the situation with the Marvel universe. But it's incredible how things work out. Like, so many people have been drawn to that book, the Marvel universe. It's like a magnet for incredible thinkers. Father John Misty posted about it. It's incredible. So it's so exciting.
Yeah, I should say that that Book Soup copy you bought was Sam Wasson started a publishing house called Felix Farmer. So Sam did a limited run beautiful little book, because if you go on Amazon, you can get it as well, but it's from a publisher that is a kind of a vulture publisher. They specialize in instantly publishing books that are in the public domain. So, hey, whether it's Nathaniel Hawthorne, Thucydides, or Bruce Wagner, it's all good for me. But, In Like a Lion, Out Like a Lion, really for me was very much Roger Orr. There's a very small section in the book that talks about, I'm going to confuse who it is. Maybe it's Eartha Kitt, maybe it's Lena Horne, I can't remember. But it's a true story of that singer's mother. That singer's sister told that when, let's say it's Eartha Kitt, when Eartha Kitt died, she died screaming. And I've actually known some people that I've heard the same of. And there's something so enraptured me about that. You come in with a scream and to leave with a scream. Because this image we have is often of we're at peace. It's all a complete fantasy. You die surrounded by family. You don't die upside down trapped in a cave like a famous spelunker did years ago. And you're upside down for 27 hours with one hand stuck under your stomach, one in the small of your back. We die suddenly. We die by violence. We die by our own hand. But the prevailing Western fantasy is that we die, with all loose ends tied up, surrounded by family, Well, that may happen. Some people have an easier death than others, for sure. But for me, to go out with a scream, there was something magnificent about it. So I have mostly signed that book, In Like a Lion, Out Like a Lion. It's certainly how I'd like to go.
I love it. I love that. Another thing, so just commenting again about the beauty of the book, the Winslow Homer painting had not been familiar with before. So it's called A Summer Night, 1890. It's in the inside cover of the book. It's mentioned in the book. I was just looking at, versions of it online just to see, the magnitude of it. Why that painting? What brought you to that piece of art?
I've loved that painting for a long time. It's almost like a painting that could be science fiction art. There's something very mystical about it. It's a couple or two women, it's always seemed to me, in a dance, in front of a raging sea, high on a promontory, with a group of dark figures watching them. And there was always something very mystical and calming for me about that, because it reinforced the epiphany of that painting is it reinforces the tender insignificance of all of us who are living, walking, breathing on this planet. And it indicates or points the way through a kind of intent and great artistry where we may be going after we do our dance here. And it's referenced in the book. And one thing I did add late in the game, in terms of preparing the book to be published, this Winslow Homer painting was owned by Roger Orr's parents. And Laughlin Orr, his sister, is talking about it. And at one point she says that they sold it, and she regrets that terribly. But she says, you should put the painting somewhere in the book, Bruce. So there it is in the end pages. That didn't occur to me to do till much later in the game. But if you take a deep dive into that book, that painting, The Summer Night, it turns out to be, it was a painting I latched onto when I was quite young. It turns out to be one of his more famous paintings, and no one was interested in it in America. No one wanted to buy it. And then there was an exhibition in France that showed the painting, and the painting became kind of a cause célèbre, but not for years until it was shown at an exhibition in France. So there's a lot about that particular painting that makes words unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And that's what I loved about it. It became part of the book, the nonverbal part of the book. It creates such a mystical feeling and such a mood. And I love the idea of grafting that onto a book in which words are so essential and unapologetically important, that you have this painting which reminds us of the fundamental inexpressibility of our human experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just it all just ties together. Like it's incredible. I don't know how you do it. It's every book that I've read. I've read all of your books now, and I'm blown away. They're ones I revisit too over the years, because you had commented, I think, on one of the recent interviews again, how and I totally related to this. When you read a book, it goes away after a certain time, even it can immediately for me, so you have little memories. So with your work, some of it overlaps, it blends together. And especially when you have characters that appear in several of the books, it really does that, which I love that. It's a body of work that I revisit all the time and will do for, as long as I live. I'm confident. It's just and at different points in my life, I read something in your work and it resonates in a different way. So it is just an incredible thing. Where a book, you read it, you love it, it goes away. It has it leaves a feeling with you, a memory that is, distorted because our, the way we remember things, it's not as it was. Just you're one of my favorites. I can't
praise Jesus. you had asked me about my next book.
Yes.
Or book, and I do want to write a book called The Met Ball, which I'm still wrestling with this idea of whether that should be an oral history or not. And I'm very much want to do a book of ghost stories, Hollywood ghost stories.
I'd love that. That would be great.
that really are my homage to the great Lafcadio Hearn, and the ghost stories of his that are so discombobulating and mystical and terrifying, and yet have this great beauty to them. I'd love to do the same, and have the book putatively be about Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
As all my books seem to be one way or another. I can't get away from it. I talked with Sam Wasson about this, and we seem to be such creatures of Hollywood, it's really woven into our DNA, so I'm excited, I should say more. I mean, what a strange time we're in, where an author, rather than being angry that whatever he writes will be either censored or he will become impotent. And whatever he writes will not see publication. And the other side of that is the author that is excited that in the let's say the last quarter of his life, although I would be excited if it was the first quarter of the game, that his work will be published, and not so much published, but acknowledged and uncensored. Because that's, for the writer to be censored is like the caver being wedged upside down, and there's no escape from that, from being silenced. So there's that aspect of, is it prisoner without a number, cell without a name, or prisoner without a name, cell without a number? There's that aspect of erasure that any working writers are experiencing now more than ever, with people who have no business reading one's work and passing judgment on its acceptability for publication, being in positions of power like petty bureaucrats, and subject only to the vagaries and whims of the passing fancy, So that's, for me, is the thing that excites me most, that I can express in the ultimate extreme way. I can use my voice,
That's great. What more can you ask for? It's incredible. And I'm just, again, such an admirer of your work. I can't wait for the audiobook. That sounds like a real treat. Like the amount of work that went, I can't even imagine. It just sounds what an undertaking, but I can't wait to listen to it.
It was a horror, but it was a divine horror. And I've heard some of it, and it's rather astonishing. So I do encourage people to listen to it.
Excellent. And I encourage people to, there's an Instagram and a TikTok, that I believe the publisher they put out videos of you talking about the book if they want to, get more of a taste before they actually pick up the book. There's some great, short videos of you discussing the book that I've found very, interesting and entertaining.
Thank you. It was, it's not something I would have thought to do, but they've been so wonderful to me that I wanted to do, and still want to do, anything that would help the cause.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people just from my reposting. They hadn't heard of you before, and now they're interested. Now they're jumping into the Marvel universe. So
I'll say it again. Praise Jesus.
Praise Jesus. Bruce, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyler. I'm appreciative of your continued interest and your passion, and be well, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bruce. This was fun.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.